Good evening, and thank you all for joining us tonight for the second lecture of the Aspire Leadership Lecture Series for 2020. My name is Luke Murphy. I have the privilege of being the 2020 President of the Queensland Law Society, and I will chair this evening. In opening tonight's session, I acknowledge the Turrbal and Yagara peoples as the traditional owners and custodians of the land here in Meanjin, Brisbane, from which I am presenting to you today. In the spirit of reconciliation and inclusivity, I would like to recognise and acknowledge country throughout Queensland and extend my deep respects to all elders, past, present and emerging. This is a COVID-safe event for those attending here at Law Society House. You're all used by now, I have no doubt, to the advice that is coming and the recommendation that you all please maintain physical distancing and practice high-level hand hygiene. It also means, unfortunately, that this evening there will be no social drinks at the end of the Commissioner's presentation to us, but we all live in hope that at the third lecture or the first lecture next year that we will be able to enjoy the occasion of a couple of quiet drinks in one another's company. To ask a question during the session, could I ask you to go to slido.com and use the events code QLS events and enter your questions, which I will then be sent through to me. I have discussed with the Commissioner that the best way we think to work the questions is we'll allow the Commissioner to complete her presentation, and then I'll direct the questions that we do receive to her conclusion. Please note the seminar is being filmed, including the question and answer session, and therefore we do require all questions to come through the Slido app. By attending this evening, you all receive 0.5 of CPD point. And finally, for those physically present here at the Law Society, in the event of fire, please follow directions from QLS staff who are in control of the whole evening tucked down the back. Emergency exits are located either sides of the lifts, and the evacuation meeting place is King George Square. It is my pleasure to welcome you all here to the second Aspire lecture of 2020. The Aspire program is continuing to develop, and in a year such as we have experienced, the opportunity for us to hear from leaders in our community and to understand the challenges that they have had to face in their career and from which they have emerged has never been more germane. The Aspire Leadership Lecture Series was designed specifically to satisfy the desire among young practitioners to enhance their leadership skills, including emotional intelligence, agility and resilience. And tonight we are honoured to have Queensland Police Commissioner Katarina Carroll APM join us to share her insights on how she became the influential leader she is today. Commissioner Carroll was sworn in as the 20th Commissioner of the Queensland Police Service in 2019. She is the Chair of the QPS Board of Management and currently the Chair of the Public Safety Business Agency Board of Management, the support agency for public safety agencies. Throughout her career, which began in 1983, Commissioner Carroll has worked in various roles, including time in criminal investigation branches, a commission of inquiry, the Joint Crime Task Force, and the Covert Unit. In 2012, she was made the Operations Commander or G20 Planning in what is still Australia's largest peacetime security operation. Commissioner Carroll has been the recipient of numerous international, national and state awards, including the Australian Police Medal. She was also awarded the National Telstra Business Women's Award for Government and Academia in 2015, and later that year named as one of the Australian Financial Review and Westpac's 100 Women of Influence. It is my privilege to ask Commissioner Carroll to speak tonight and to share the challenges and the opportunities that she has faced and accepted during her career. Please give a warm welcome to Commissioner Katarina Carroll APM.
Thank you, Lee, for that warm welcome. Before I start, I would like to acknowledge the traditional owners on the land on which we meet, and obviously, acknowledge their elders past, present and emerging. I often think when people mention when I actually started in policing, I should remove that from my bio because I look out and people are starting to do the math. But I've got to say, I started at a very young age. I would like to acknowledge also Luke Murphy, Queensland Law Society President, as well as the Deputy President, soon to be President, Elizabeth Shearer, Queensland Law Society CEO, Rob Moses, and ladies and gentlemen. Today I'm going to talk a little bit about my leadership journey. And I think I need to really go back to where it all started from, because it really has influenced my life in terms of my leadership. So many of you would not know my background, and whilst there are many lessons that we will speak about, this background of mine has certainly influenced my career. And I do believe that the humble beginnings of my family has significantly shaped who I am today, particularly my professional career. I was raised by parents who were Croatian immigrants on a tobacco farm in far north Queensland, where my siblings and I spent a lot of time working in the tobacco fields. We had to, we were quite poor, and my parents came to this great country to afford and give us children a better life. Whilst we did work physically hard over an extended period of time, my youth was wonderful, full of fun, freedom and independence. Driving tractors, cars and motorbikes from a very young age and spending endless hours outside running around the farm. The hours that we worked and how we worked alongside the family and the many workers that we employed on that farm instilled in my siblings and myself an incredible work ethic and resilience beyond what most children would have experienced early in their lives. As you could appreciate, I spoke very little English until I went to school, but certainly as children do, picked up the language very, very quickly. In secondary school, my parents sacrificed a lot to afford my brothers and I to go to very good boarding schools. I started there at the age of 12 and was heavily influenced, other than a very, very strong mother, by other strong women, the Mercy sisters. Highly educated, intelligent, independent women, raising and educating young women. It was at boarding school that I was drawn to the police service from a very young age. Two of my closest friends had fathers in the police service, and I would spend many weekends at their places. One was in Ravenscoe and the other one in a little place called Mount Surprise. I would watch how they interacted with community and how the community responded to them. This reinforced my desire to enter the police service, where I started my career at the age of 18. However, when I left school, I had just turned 17. So in the interim for those 2 years, I attended James Cook University and studied community welfare prior to commencing, and this really helped me with state policing as well. I did spend very little time in uniform, moving quickly into detective work, and I spent some 15 years as a detective. My first posting in plainclothes was in 1987, and you wouldn't believe where, the licensing branch. I arrived there some 2 weeks before the Four Corners program exposed the corruption in not only in policing, but in also the government of the day. There was only 20 of us in the licensing branch. I often tell the story that all my old bosses went to jail, and they did, but my new bosses and myself went on to lead and excel and lead a very progressive QPS in the future. Even if you go into such a place with the right intent, my intent was to work hard, start my plainclothes journey and achieve my detective point within 3 years. Not to conform is impossible. We are all humans and we want to fit in, especially as a junior officer back then. You shut up, you did as you were told, and if you didn't, you were well aware of the consequences. However, if you did want to speak up, there were no processes, no structures, and no systems. Where do you report? Who do you report to? And who will listen to you when corruption went to the top of the organisation? I often say that a Fitzgerald inquiry is one of the worst things that can happen to an organisation. But I also say that it's one of the best things that could have happened, propelling us to one of the most educated, advanced and contemporary policing organisations in the world. After 3 years in licensing branch, I worked in criminal investigation branches and task forces, which were heavily male dominated. The police service at the time only had 4% of women. Whether you like it or not, this did present me and other women at the time with endless challenges that we needed to overcome as we tried to progress through the ranks. I then moved into more managerial roles and corporate roles and worked my way up to the rank of Assistant Commissioner, which is a senior executive level of our organisation. Whilst progressing through the ranks, I was very lucky to have a mentor who was a male Assistant Commissioner. At the time, we obviously didn't have female Assistant Commissioners. And for me, he was extraordinarily influential. He was positive and he was passionate about the job. What I liked most about him, and sometimes did not like about him, was that he was very, very frank in his advice. He was open and honest, teaching me the importance of taking actions on outcomes that I didn't believe went in my favour, to not complain and be disheartened about the opportunities that I missed out on, and to find out why and make clear to my senior officers of the opportunities that I wanted in the future. I certainly learnt how to focus, how to develop, and how to improve for that next opportunity. After moving my family endlessly around the state, in fact, when I got promoted to Assistant Commissioner in Cairns in 2010, my husband and I decided that he would stay in Brisbane with one of our children and I would move to Cairns with the other. And this was for a 2-year period. And the reason behind this is one child had a lot of issues in terms of adapting to new schools, where my daughter who came with me had no such issues. So really for us as a family, it was a good decision at the time. When I wanted to come back within 2 years, as I was one of the senior leaders that moved the most in the organisation at that period of time, it was about the same time that Brisbane had been announced as the host of the G20 Leaders Forum. I thought to myself, this was a great opportunity to come back to Brisbane. One of the Brisbane Assistant Commissioners would get the G20 role and I could take his vacancy. I was a very junior Assistant Commissioner and the only woman on the senior executive. Mind you, the entire executive leadership team were all hoping that they were not going to be handed the poison chalice. After all, not many G20 security operations around the world are successful, particularly in democratic nations. In fact, we're all looking at each other thinking, who was the poor sod that's going to end up with this gig? Little did I know that it was going to be me. When I was asked by Commissioner Ian Stewart to take on the 2-year planning role and then the operations commander at the time of the event, I could have easily said no. And I so remember that conversation so clearly, I felt like saying no. But there was the opportunity of a lifetime to be the commander of Australia's largest peacetime security operation. It was unlike any other operation undertaken by the Queensland Police Service previously. The host was actually Prime Minister and Cabinet, and we, the jurisdictional security lead. For myself and my team of 120 planners, it was an intense and stressful 2 years. The scrutiny by 3 levels of government and our international counterparts was quite extraordinary. But the media scrutiny certainly added an interesting layer. As one journalist of a very prominent newspaper, put it in 2014, Carroll too will be under the spotlight. Get the event right, no shootings, no out-of-control protests, no monumental transport stuff-ups, and the whispers about her being a future police commissioner will grow louder. Get it wrong, and well, there'll be a lot more time to spend on the sidelines as a soccer mum. Whether I liked it or not, fair enough, that's exactly what would have happened. The role was a big deal. Commanders and police leaders hold ultimate authority and responsibility for the outcome of any event, activity or operation that they command. The success or failure of the security operation for this G20 firmly lay on my shoulders. Communicating my intent, my vision, so that it was unambiguous, achievable, and understood by every member under my command, all 7,000 from 8 jurisdictions, was the key to our success. It was essential that every step, from introductions to presentations, legislation, policy, training, inductions, that everyone knew the intent, the vision, what was going on, and that the message was clear. Clarity of purpose was extremely important, so that there was a focus on the goal without wasting time or energy. I could go into many aspects of G20, but was it a success? Yes, it was. Would I have changed things? Certainly, if I had my time again, as some lessons you only learn along the way. Success came down to a number of key strategies. Innovation like never before. Evidence clearly showed that if we did business the same way, we wouldn't have failed. I sent staff across the world to learn as much as they could from every major event. Presidential inaugurations, G8s, G7s, G20s, you name it, we did it. And we completely changed the business model, policing business model for this one event. Relationships. Every stakeholder was identified and prioritised. Protesters were number one on my list. Businesses, community, other agencies, 3 levels of government, international security, FBI, Secret Service, plus all. Each group had an individualised communication and engagement strategy built around them for us to understand what was important to them. Clarity of purpose, intent, vision, strategy, aligned with other key agencies. The purpose was set in unison with Prime Minister and Cabinet, and we lived and breathed it daily. Police from other states also had to live and breathe it. 8 different police agencies, but just the one team. Most importantly, we took communication engagement to a level never witnessed before. As I said, I could probably talk for hours on the lessons alone from G20, but thankfully it was a success. This was not a fluke, but sheer hard work and passion, learning from the past, being innovative, having a clear purpose and showing attention to relationships and detail. And whilst I look forward to a few well-earned weeks of rest at the end, I was then asked by the government of the day to act as the interim commissioner of a new department, Queensland Fire and Emergency Services. Once again, I felt like saying no, as we were all well aware of the damning report by the previous Public Service Commissioner, Margaret Allison. A report that included some 30 recommendations addressing issues of culture, sexual harassment, workplace bullying, and systemic organisational problems within QFES, which limited its ability to respond appropriately and effectively to such matters generally. I was exhausted. I hadn't had leave for 2 years. G20 had just finished, and I thought to myself, do I really want to go to another agency, an agency that I knew very little about, and undertake a reform agenda that was going to take years? Let me tell you, it is very difficult to say no to a premier, and in fact I would say career limiting. But once again, I found myself in an unbelievable opportunity. And again, where success or failure rested purely on my shoulders. What I wasn't aware of, and I was touching on this point with Luke just a moment ago, and when I took the role, that the report and the review by Margaret Allison was only a small component of greater reform that is required in the organisation. I truly did underestimate the enormity of the challenge that I was confronted with. It was a new department as a result of the machinery of government changes. QFES was made up of 4 different agencies within the one new department. Fire and Rescue Service, Rural Fire Service, State Emergency Service and Emergency Management Queensland. 4 different cultures, uniforms, histories, identities, processes, systems, practices, levels of training, levels of skill, funding, resourcing, and the list went on and on. Little did I know at the time, there actually is some big difference between a red and yellow fire truck. In some respects, I actually felt that I was walking through the gates of the Oxley Police Academy all those years ago, with women only making up 4% of the fire and rescue service. Jumping from the Queensland Police Service, an organisation that I knew so well, to one that I didn't really know at all, was the most challenging time in my career. Those first few months were extraordinarily tough, and even in the first few weeks, G20 was but a distant memory and almost felt like a breeze compared to what I was now faced with. The difference between this and G20, that within G20, each stakeholder, whether it was Prime Minister and Cabinet, the Secret Service, or the 100 other agencies that were involved with, we all wanted the same outcome. We wanted a safe, secure and successful G20. But here were cultures and identities that were so strong, and the way the groups operated was so different. Each group wanted a different outcome. I sought advice of others, particularly those people who have been in similar situations, but there weren't many. It was the first time in Queensland history that a senior police officer was the acting commissioner of the Fire and Emergency Services Department. The first few months I spent travelling, getting to know the people, their role, and the many cultures within that department, at the same time implementing a massive change agenda. As you can appreciate, I copped a lot of criticism for not being a firefighter. I thought I was also going to cop a lot of criticism for being a woman in a very masculine organisation. But I must say I was pleasantly surprised and had to chuckle when a union rep said to me, very early in the piece, that they did not mind that I was a woman. However, they did take issue with the fact that I was a police officer. In fact, I wasn't prepared for that one, I must say. In fact, I was a police officer for the first 8 months before resigning and applying for the role in a full-time capacity. I needed the right team who were very passionate about the vision, as I was. I chose 3 new deputies, one from within the organisation, one from Victoria, and a past senior executive from the Commonwealth who had worked in many careers before, including policing. I changed 14 of my senior executives in 4.5 years. I had to. Some chose to leave, others were encouraged to, and others did not have that contract renewed. We as a leadership team could not achieve the transformation that was expected by not only government and community, but ourselves as leaders within that organisation. Finding common ground amongst the various groups, which was ultimately the outcome envisioned, was what brought all of us together. It was about communicating, engaging, influencing, and really connecting with our people to get them on the reform journey. The strategic mantra was one QFES, many services, many capabilities. As you move up in an organisation, you start driving strategy, but you must not forget where you come from and make sure that those key operational people understand what you are trying to achieve, but more importantly, why. This is a great challenge in hierarchical rank-based organisations, as there are many layers between me and the people on the operational ground. In fact, there are 8 layers. That is why I spend a lot of time travelling and talking to people, because it truly is about visible and genuine leadership. I believe if we can bridge those layers, then people would be more than happy to accommodate. In fact, I've seen this many times. and can understand where I and the organisation are coming from, heading to, and why. In July of 2019, another opportunity presented itself. Ian Stewart had decided to retire from the Queensland Police Service, and I decided to apply for the position and was obviously successful in being appointed the 20th Police Commissioner and the first female Police Commissioner of the Queensland Police Service. My professional life had actually come to full circle. I was hoping to come back to the QPS and have some respite, but that certainly was not the case and has not been the case. Here I am again undertaking a massive change agenda. Soon after my arrival, it had become apparent that crime was rising, demand for services was dramatically increasing, and the organisational structure that we implemented in 2013, which was a highly centralised structure, may not be the structure that will hold us in good stead into the future. Assessment of our Working for Queensland survey results and spending time again with the frontline supported my observations. I obtained the services of a person who's very well known in the field of reforming police agencies in the UK to undertake a full review of the QPS. The first time ever the QPS had commissioned its own review rather than having an external review imposed upon us. And yes, demand for service, calls for service had increased 45% in 5 years. 70% increase in 000 calls, DV occurrences, mental health, crime rates had all dramatically increased, with very little corresponding staffing increases. The situation was unsustainable and it was going to be almost impossible to achieve a new policing strategy, which is prevention, disruption, response and investigation. How do you meet this when we've spent most of our time responding to the demand? The service alignment has commenced and almost every aspect of how we deliver policing services into the future will change, moving the pendulum from responding to preventing and disrupting crime. The evidence clearly shows us that if you can intervene early, divert and prevent crime, and as an agency we'll have to respond less, but better still, there will be less crime. Before I comment on what I have learned on my leadership journey, I wanted to touch on our work on our organisational values, which I am extraordinarily proud of in the QPS. Values, as you know, are the foundational building blocks of culture, so it is incredibly important that they are meaningful and hold a shared sense of purpose. Historically, the QPS values are set by the incoming Commissioner. However, I believe that it's important that our values are meaningful for all our people. And so, multiple sessions were held throughout the state, across a large section of the QPS, to inform our new values. And as such, the members of the organisation have set the new values for QPS: integrity, professionalism, community and respect and fairness. This approach was incredibly important to me, so that I, alongside people in my organisation, can be proud of our values, which will not only drive our culture, but also help us hold each other to account. Just a few months ago, I celebrated my 1-year anniversary as the Commissioner. We can often cite previous years as being busier than the last without acknowledging why. Sometimes I think it's a habit, and we often take on more emotionally due to the pressures we put on ourselves to always be better versions of ourselves on previous years. For me though, and I think for a lot of you and a lot of society, I can safely say, with the uncertainty that a health pandemic has presented for all of us, this past 12 months have been something I have never experienced before when put up against previous significant events. And so, upon reflection, I can honestly say that my leadership journey is far from over. And although I do have more to learn, I believe I'm in a very good position to pass on some career, life and leadership advice. First and foremost, for someone who has had a lot of experience in this space, never let an opportunity pass. Opportunities on occasion present themselves in disguise. And it is important as learning leaders that you take at each and every opportunity as they come along. As Sir Richard Branson puts it, if someone offers you an amazing opportunity, but you are not sure you can do it, just say yes and then learn how to do it later. Make your own path. Don't just depend on the organisation to make that path for you. Organisations like the Queensland Police Service have in some ways very traditional paths, particularly in the early years of your policing career. But if you are thinking about taking that next step, why not challenge yourself and think, why can't I do that? And how do I do that? And consider what changes you need to make to get there. Be uncomfortable. You must learn to be comfortable with being uncomfortable, as this is the only way that you will learn and grow as a person and as a leader. And I've got to say, in the QPS in particular, I spent many years being uncomfortable, growing and learning as a leader. I think in the first 6 weeks I went home to my husband and said, I can't do this. I think the only reason that stopped me is I couldn't bear to read the front page of the Courier Mail the next day. So I hung in there, thankfully so. Self-doubt is not bad. And I had many times self-doubt, taking such an event as G20 and QFES on. There is going to be self-doubt. But it certainly makes you reflect and question why you are there and how you are travelling. It may need be more comprehensive in every aspect of my approach. I check in with my peers, colleagues and mentors to make sure that I was on the right path. Network, but network strategically. Start to concern yourself with all broad strategic issues. Have relationships up, down and across your organisation. This will propel you into relationships and information sources to achieve not only your goals, but your organisational goals as well. And be authentic. Don't conform. And I'm quite firm on that. Very, very difficult as a young person in the QPS to do that, but when you can, don't conform. Stay true, especially the bad culture. Stay true to yourself and how you feel. You need to be open, accountable, ethical and transparent. All your staff, the most junior to the most senior of your organisation, need to know this and should be able to approach you. By building trust and generating enthusiastic support from staff and peers, leaders will improve individual team performance, but also they will truly improve their own performance. Know yourself, self-awareness and emotional intelligence, whatever you want to call it, and knowing your blind spots are critically important. You might need a peer to point out your blind spots, as I certainly did. I had a very frank peer who would point out my blind spots for me. And whilst I'd taken aback by a few of their observations, rightfully so, he did the right thing by me. After all, it was a blind spot. And now I trust in others to actually tell me what I need to improve on. Compassion is essential. That is compassion for each other and other members of society. A leader without compassion will not generate trust, understanding and affinity with anyone, let alone the staff they lead to execute their intent and their vision. There are many definitions of leadership, and I believe that there is more definitions of leadership than most other words in our lexicon. But there is one definition that I truly like from the United Nations Office for Disaster Risk Reduction that best aligns to my thoughts on leadership. And it's simply the ability to influence, inspire and motivate others to achieve and go beyond their own goals, and to achieve great things together. I think you can tell from my speech that I'm quite passionate and excited about leadership. Every day I learn new things about leadership. It doesn't matter where you sit in your organisation. You should be able to get a response from your leader. I feel that the higher up I go in my organisation, or in any organisation, the more incumbent it is on me to look after others, particularly those who are in positions working their hearts out for all the right reasons. In my position, I can influence strategy, I can influence policy, I can make life easier for those who have very little influence. I can make it more effective and efficient for them in their workplaces. But ultimately, I can make our community safer as a result. I wish all of you in this room the best of luck to all you leaders out there who are either current leaders or new or aspiring leaders in your future leadership roles. I am aware of the Queensland Law Society's history, the structure and your planning, and I have no doubt that the passionate, positive and influential leaders that you all are, that you will not only take the Queensland Law Society, but your own individual careers to a whole new level. Can I sincerely thank you for having me here tonight, and I hope you've learned a little bit from my leadership journey. Thank you.
We don't have as yet, I don't think. We do, hang on, no, there's some coming. Okay. I know that's against the recommended protocol, but does anybody have any questions that they wish to direct to the Commissioner? There you go. Commissioner, you're faced up to the challenges. How have you approached mistakes you have made along the way and to criticism you may have experienced?
There have been many mistakes along the way, and I talk about one of the biggest, I think, mistakes that I made in G20, and if I learn lessons that, you know, those lessons you learn along the way, and I wish that I could go back and change some of them. And one of those biggest mistakes was about someone who was heading up my logistics area. In an area that had to book 10,000 flights, 20,000 rooms, hundreds and thousands of, bus movements. And I knew this person wasn't coping, and I had it reviewed, and he asked me if he could stay in that role. And I didn't trust my gut intuition to remove that person from the role. And I again got it reviewed. It wasn't travelling well. It was only a matter of months out that I took that person out of that role and someone else to start this whole piece of work just a couple of months out. We've been planning for 2 years. So you look back and that on those experiences and those decisions that you made, and you've got to learn from them. And even since then, if I've done something that I felt that I should learn from, you should fess up and say, look, I went down this path on the information that I've had, I have learned from it, and as a result, this is what we're now doing. I think as a leader, you don't just admit to mistakes, you come up with better resolutions and you learn from it. And you always come up with that next solution to take that further down the track. So I think it's incredibly important that to acknowledge that we're not all perfect, to acknowledge that we do make mistakes, but you have to learn from them. And as a leader, you should then be coming up with better solutions in the future. I do cop criticism, obviously quite publicly sometimes. If you've listened to Ray Hadley recently, he's really given it to me. And I text him and say, hey, Ray, really? I don't know if that's fair, because you don't know the exact circumstances. I do, but I don't know whether he really cares about that. But so sometimes that is tough. And I think when it's unfairly done, I try not to listen to it. But certainly it is incredibly important to listen to some of the criticism, because they can be on the money. And you might then, as a result, learn from it and change the way that you, conduct yourself as a leader. So I think you've got to weigh up, whether it's fair criticism or not, but there has been some fair criticism that as a result, I've gone back and thought and reflected and thought, well, yeah, I could have done that better and I should learn from that.
Commissioner, they're pouring in here. You might not get home
until drinks aren't on. So.
That's right. Yeah. The next question is, how do you think your career would have differed had you been offered an assistant commissioner's role rather than being, as you described it before, the receipt of the poison chalice for G20?
I don't think I'd be here. Definitely. Because as a result of that opportunity and as a result of that success, this was the only reason I was asked by the government of the day to go to QFES. And I actually thought it was a very, very tricky decision by the Premier because of what happened in G20 and I was a woman and what was happening in QFES, I was the most likely person you would ask to go and take that role on. But I would never have been in that situation if I hadn't taken on G20. But at the same token, thankfully G20 did go well, because once again, I would not have been asked to go to QFES if we didn't. So I often talk about those opportunities, that you've got to take every opportunity to, to really develop yourself. And those opportunities come in disguise. And yes, they might look like poison chalice. But if you do really well in those opportunities, if you get that team around you, because it's not down to you, it's down to that team that you lead, you will lead to other opportunities. And that will lead to other opportunities as well. And that's what I've definitely found in my career. But other opportunities may come along as well, because I cannot recall in my entire career ever saying no to an opportunity. Being the most obscure thing there is, I've taken the opportunity.
I'm going to exercise the chairman's prerogative here and ask you to just expand on this. This isn't a question that's been said, but when you were painting the picture of that opportunity for G20 being provided to you, you made the point of you were the only female assistant commissioner based up in Cairns at the time, I think that's right. And in your own mind, you saw that as an opportunity for one of the more senior assistant commissioners. And you'd worked out your own strategy as to how it was going to pan out for you. Having described it also as poison chalice, when it was offered, did you think they're just setting up the minority group here to fail so that it's, that must have played on your mind, or it didn't enter?
It did play on my mind, but also, as I think the great thing about leadership is you get to put your own brand on whatever you're doing. So here was my opportunity to do what I could in the G20 space. There is not a handbook for G20, unlike Commonwealth Games, who comes with this framework and a similar thing they do around the world. G20 is very different. The country that had it before us was from Russia. I went over there and there were no protesters in Russia, so I couldn't learn.
Adopt a different approach.
I think the paper said all protesters off to Siberia or something. That was literally on the front page. I think I don't have that luxury. But I remember clearly my strategic deputy, Ross Barnett, who had to do this, he had to do a referee report for me on my leadership skills for one of the award ceremonies. And he clearly articulated what he thought of me as a leader and why that G20 had my brand and my leadership style all over it. I never thought about it. But when you look, other assistant commissioners would have probably delivered it successfully, but they would have delivered it very differently to how I did it. I took a very ambassadorial approach to it. I concentrated heavily on what the agenda of the day was rather than just security. So it was a very different approach. Engaged heavily for 2 years with protesters and negotiated constantly, completely switched how we did business. And because it was so evidence-based and there was so much research to it, I was so confident at a time that we did business so differently that it actually, hand on heart, I was confident it was going to succeed. So yeah, it could have been, but I think, and I felt like saying, that first instance when I got the phone call, I felt like saying, oh God, no, not me, no, I'm not going to do this. But wow, after asking him still, why did you ask me? I was quite junior, I was the only woman, I wasn't in Brisbane, I just wanted to come back home. But not many people get that opportunity, and if I let it go, I was never going to get an opportunity like that. And I would always curse myself and wonder how I would have delivered compared to someone else.
Thank you. We've got 5 more questions.
This is not supposed to be hard work.
No. And I can't even offer you a drink to feed you.
A good looking uniform, let me tell you.
This question, firstly, wanted to express thanks to you for your presentation. And in relation to communication, what practical tips can you share for effectively getting a message through?
You cannot over-communicate, but I'm talking about genuine engagement. So in the QPS, when I came over, one of the things that was clearly apparent is communication, and even in QPS was completely disjointed. I changed my whole comms team in QPS as a result. So it has to be multifaceted, it has to get through the layers, and it has to be delivered not only in IT and digital, but it has to be delivered visibly as a senior leader within the organisation. When we had some 7,000 people join us for G20, I think I addressed probably 5,000 of those, clearly articulating what I expected as a head of that operation and what the QPS approach was going to be and what standards I expected, what our philosophy was, you name it. So I think everything you do has to be multifaceted, come in many forms, but the most powerful is actually visible leadership. And that was certainly the case. In fact, that was some of the lessons that we learned going into it. But as a very senior leader, you should be telling clearly what's expected of your thousands of staff. But it's certainly held true, and I'm a true believer of being able to connect in many ways.
Thank you. What are your strategies for looking after your own health and well-being, given the many challenges, responsibilities, and no doubt long hours you are dealing with?
I think they're quite simple. I get asked this quite often, do I have work-life balance? I don't think any of us really do. I just think that you try and do what you can. I still try and drive my daughter to school. Who's currently got her learners, and Mum did about 95 hours of the day and 100 hours that we have to do. So I still try and do that. I still try and take her tennis in the afternoon. After all, we all have iPads and phones, so you're on, call 24/7 anyway. So I think wherever you can, you need to acknowledge that I've got to set an example. So I'm going to do that. So I expect my staff to do that as well. And not be hard on yourself if you can't achieve that balance all the time. And actually realise there will be a chapter where things will change dramatically. So things will change. Yeah, it's tough. I miss out on some of the things that I, should go to for the children, but they've known me in these roles for an extended period, and the whole family's in it. You should see the phone calls I made today just to get to my daughter to tennis, let alone. But that's I think keeps you grounded. And the conversations with your partner, everything we've done has been as a family and a partnership, and not on your own. I think the worst you can do is kind of be out there on your own without that support. So be grounded where you can, have genuine discussions with your family, just admit to yourself, you're not going to get it right all the time. There'll be months and years. COVID is a typical example at the moment for a couple of my senior people. Wow, I don't think they've had a day off in a year. There have been people working on the borders for 250 days straight, 12-hour shifts, and exhausted. But we all know that at some stage that will lighten up. So I think you've got to just be resilient enough that that change will come, and do whatever you can to cope in the meantime. And having support and a good approach with your partner and your colleagues is extraordinarily important.
Thank you. How have you increased diversity as a leader in the police force?
So, I should tell you the story. So when I came in, the Institute had introduced a 50-50 policy. It had quite I would say, poisonous taste in the organisation. The organisation felt, even from a lot of the women, because I spoke to them at the time, they felt that standards were being lowered to allow certain cohorts to get in. So I got rid of them. One of the best decisions I made, I've got to say, because we could not achieve it. It doesn't matter what we did, we could not achieve it. And in fact, Triple C will come down with some recommendations about that very, very shortly, because my view is things weren't done well to do what we had to do. And I can't publicly speak about that at the moment, so that'll come down very shortly. So I purposely got rid of it because we weren't doing it the right way. However, there are many, many ways that we can achieve it. In the last 12 months, I think we went from 3 women at the senior executive table to 7, and that's just a 12-month period. And you can do it genuinely through development, through mentoring, through creating opportunities, so many other ways. But as the leader, though, you've got to drive it. You've got to drive it, and you've got to be constantly talking about it. You've got to put it in your policies, in your training, in your planning. You know, even today at the ELT, at our executive leadership team, we changed our multicultural unit's name. We purposely made it First Nations Multicultural Unit. And we had a big discussion about how this was going to play out in the organisation and what we did in terms of Indigenous recruiting, et cetera, and our relationships with all of our Indigenous groups. When you get your leadership board on board with those big policy shifts, and you all drive it passionately, and you're always having a conversation at the most senior level, and they drive that through the organisation, you can achieve that. So we're about to embark on how we do recruiting, some of the things that we have found. You know, our courses at the Academy go for 7 months, and our wage out there is pretty poor, let me tell you, because you're out there not earning much money, and single women can't do it, single mums can't do it. So we're opening up how you can better do it online, and then having to go to the Academy for, you know, a less period of time. So you've got to have the policy, you've got to have the strategy, you've got to have the leadership drive, but you cannot take your foot off the pedal at any time. And when you come from an evidence base, that clearly shows you that if you have diversity, particularly at that senior level of the organisation, that we will be more ethical, more productive and more engaged. I think you're in a pretty good place. And whilst we have a fair bit of ground to make up, I think that the future is looking healthy. But I've got to say, will QPS and other masculine organisations ever get to 50-50? No. But is that a fail? Because I've got to tell you, at 55 years of age, I do not want to be a constable on the street of Queensland fighting with drunken humans. Believe me, it's not attractive to everybody. But if people want to come into the organisation, they should be. I want it at a critical mass. We're at about 28%. If I'd like to be closer to 35-40, at that critical mass that you actually have a healthy organisation as a result. And that's the most critical part of it.
Thank you. Not dissimilar to that theme, what strategies did you use along the way to deal with and flourish in such a male-dominated organisation? Was there a deliberate process or pathway that you put in place to confront?
I don't know if it was deliberate, and this is not being crass, it was being spot on. When I was at the Academy in '83, and people would even say this to you, you're either a lesbian or you're either did a lot of things with a lot of men all at once. It was one or the other. So you always found, it was quite crude, the language used was quite crude. So you're always walking this fine line, you know, of just wanting to do your work and your head down. And I think because I came from a very, a background off the farm, you know, I drove cars, motorbikes, I did a lot of sport. I found it very easy to join into men's conversations about sport. Most of them in tennis and squash would help. So I found it quite natural being in that environment. But as much as some of that was, and I'll tell you some stories that would make your skin crawl back then, not just to me, but other women in the organisation. But I think one of the most powerful things and what made me successful is I had so many good men on my side. There are so many good men that actually did help you in those challenging times, that took people on who did the wrong thing or made derogatory remarks or purposely sidelined you. You know, it was often I was told that you shouldn't be in the job you take up the position of other good men. You will never make it here because you're a woman. You will fail when you go back to the academy. So that was just a given in those early days. But when Fitzgerald happened and policy and strategy and legislation and the reform, everything changed. It gave women an opportunity to just go through the organisation in terms of promotion on merit. Promotion used to be on seniority. So every Friday we'd get out the Gazette and iron out all the people that died with a red pen and wait till we got up to the top of the list. But Fitzgerald changed all that and introduced more women. So when you have a healthy amount of diverse groups coming through, it actually makes the organisation a whole lot easier. So a lot of things happen and a lot of good men help along the way. And I think I was very clear on where I wanted to be and how I was going to get down some of the steps.
Thank you. We might limit the questions. I'm sorry to stop you. We've got two, so we might finish with the final two so the Commissioner knows that she will get home. The second last question is, how should leaders check in on culture within an organisation to identify and fix issues before they end up being systemic within it?
So I don't accept that leaders don't know what's happening in their patch. And we do a very, very comprehensive working for Queensland survey result. And some of it, there's been some great results, but some of it is very, when it's very red, you've got some problems. But long before you see that in evidence, you know something's happening in that patch. So my view is that leaders should know what's happening in their patch, and there's many ways of finding out. And more often than not, they do know what's happening in their patch, and it's up to them to actually do something about it. Where we have an issue, and it's not just us, it's addressing performance and having those conversations around performance that could be better done, I think, by a lot of people. And even in my organisation, we're just going through a whole strategy at the moment addressing performance in a three-tiered approach. So as a leader, it's actually your responsibility to address issues around culture, and it's your responsibility to make the changes that need to be made. And if you as a leader don't do that, and then coming in my organisation in the future, that you something to be held to account. We have some pockets that and I think all organisations do that I know that we could be doing better at, and it ultimately comes down to leadership at the end of the day, that at every level of those units. And like I spoke about the ELT today, we looked at all of our work with Queensland survey results and addressed some of the issues that you were just talking about. How leaders need to address performance and how we need to change culture in certain aspects of our organisation. I think you're in a pretty good healthy space if you've got just pockets of it and you can deal with it, but when it's systemic, then you know you have an organisational issue that you've got to deal with. And certainly and thankfully we haven't found that at all in recent years. But if you're not always on top of it, always in terms of, you know, how your leaders approach this, what policies you have in place that people can really speak. You know, complaint reporting in our organisation is about 30% internal reporting, so you know that you have a pretty good organisation when you have people within the organisation saying, well, hang on a minute, we shouldn't be doing this. So they're the things we need to keep an eye on as well.
Thank you. And the final question is, do you make decisions that don't align to your core values, possibly due to other stakeholders? And if so... It's
not to do with politics or anything.
If so, how do you reconcile that?
I am in a very political position, let me tell you. And in fact, coming into the election, I was very uncomfortable with some of the late policy announcements that were made just out from election. And there are announcements that we were working on for an extended period of time. And this was the growth in policing numbers. And I was highly criticised publicly about being too closely aligned with a certain party, particularly coming into election. And look, I've got to say, there is no black and white. So if you think that my role or roles that are, you know, quite political is black and white, it can't be. It never will be. So if I have suggestions from, you know, people, and there's many of them, many stakeholders that would like you to go to a certain path, I am very firm on not going. There's a lot of argy-bargy that goes on in some of these conversations. That we can't go down that path because we're independent of you and we're going down this path. However, when we have a liaison officer that works closely in the minister's offices and all over the place to try and negotiate some of this before decisions are actually made. But we will always try wherever we can to come up with an alternative. So I would never compromise my values or the independence of my organisation, but I will come up as best as we can with alternatives that will suit that outcome, but certainly won't compromise us. And it's quite astonishing when you think that might be hard. In many instances, it is actually quite easy because they would have thought about it, they would have thought that's the only way to do it. Where we'd say, well, actually, we can't do that because the policy and legislation around independence, it doesn't work. But how about we do this? And it works. So I think if you can accept the fact, it's not black and white, that there is always another way, and most of the times you will get the outcome that you want. There will be some times that it's going to be very unpopular, but it's just a no. It's a clear no. And I will come back, and my staff from my office is here, and we have this often, and we will just say, if you're not, it cannot be done. The last thing I want is for us to appear, on the front page of Journal or a news article doing the wrong thing, particularly not only by my organisation, but most importantly by the community that we serve.
Thank you.
Thanks.
What a wonderful story and a wonderful presentation, and delivered in such a natural manner as well. So thank you very much, Commissioner. As you've all heard, there are, and this is what the whole lecture series is about, the role of leadership involved is multifaceted. And that's what distinguishes different leaders. And the Commissioner very clearly articulated that for us in terms of if one of the other G20, or if G20 had been given to one of the other assistant commissions, would have been successful, or would have had a vastly different style approach about it. And that's important for anyone who's in a leadership role, that there's not just one way of doing it. As is, again, very evident from the Commissioner's address, the foundations of leadership are dependent on self-awareness and recognition of your own strengths and, just as importantly, weaknesses. And the Commissioner's demonstrated tonight the significance and importance of recognising your own core values and using those as the building blocks for your own style of leadership. Can I ask you all to join me again in thanking the Commissioner for her presentation? It has really been wonderful.
Thanks.
Thank you.